today we can take home that theory is not enough. We must search for solutions and practice.
That there's a lot of highfalutin talk about rights, but unless you can translate that into real stories to move the hearts and minds, and I think that's what I hear Fundamental Rights Agency committing to, and I'll certainly be playing my part to continue that story.
I think we should start talking to people that disagree with us. That we should involve to events like this one, people that don't share the same views that we share, in order to debate, question them and us about some of the propositions that we have, because that's the best way to advance the agenda of human rights in Europe.
I hope to make people care about human rights by talking about it in a way that everyone can understand.
I will take back two things mostly with me to Brussels. That is, first of all, the confirmation that the FRA is very skillful in peeling away different layers of human rights by bringing together people from all different kinds of strands of life. It's very enriching. And secondly, the concept of storytelling. And I will think about how I can incorporate more the concept of storytelling in my legislative work.
I think it's important to keep in mind that we are all here to tell the same story, and that it should be positive, and that we should really be constructive in the story, and put together people of different mindsets as well in safe spaces.
I think we have much more simple our message, because we are trying to speak very organized and very difficult to young generation, and the young generation has other language what we are normally using in European institution.
As a result of this forum, I'm going to continue to engage with people outside of human rights sectors. I'm going to continue to raise human rights issues with different players and partners, which is broader than my traditional pool of people. In addition, I'm going to continue to ensure that young people can engage in these structures, and that we continue to develop our intersectional approaches to how we work as a sector, but also how we bring more people and their experiences into discussions.
Yes, so we were lucky enough to be able to run a session yesterday at the forum, and we got really good input from participants, concrete input that we will take back and we will use in the movement in the future, including, for example, asking the Commission, the European Commission, to lower the threshold to file citizen initiatives in order to enable more citizen participation in the European Union. So it was super useful for us.
Puisqu'on a vu durant ces journées du forum de la FRA que les droits humains aujourd'hui doivent être protégés plus que jamais. Pas seulement doivent être respectés, mais ils doivent aussi être mieux communiqués.
The FRA is really an institution that is working with evidence, and this evidence I also need in my global study on children deprived of liberty in order to report then concrete figures and cases to the General Assembly when I present my report in New York.
So hello again, everyone. And for our final session, our final panel, we've heard a lot of promises, a lot of pledges, calls for action. Of course, Michael's very powerful message about we are in trouble, but things are going to get better. But for things to get better, we all have to work together, but also individually. So I'm going to chair, moderate a panel, which is about how we're going to deliver on fundamental rights in tomorrow's Europe. And I'd like to call the panel to the stage. Could I ask Ms. Mairead McGuinness, First Vice President of the European Parliament, to please come and take her place here. Also, Emmanuel Crabit, Director for Fundamental Rights and Rule of Law at the European Commission. Please come here as well. Thank you very much. Please, do take a seat. Yes. Mr. George Ciamba, State Secretary, Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Romania. Please come to the stage as well. And Zara Todd, member of FRA's advisory panel, who we've seen also in the clip. Please come up as well. And Michael, if I could ask you to join the panel as well, please. Okay, thank you very much. So we've heard, as I said, all the commitments that have been made by yourselves, but also by many of the senior officials we've had from many of the institutions, the Commissioner, the Ombudsman, and of course Michael has committed FRA to many, many important actions. And all of you have heard the statement, the chair's statement that Michael made. I was just wondering if I could ask all of you to give your comments in about 3 minutes about where you think the emphasis will be, what you would like to underline, what you think is very, very important in this, and how you will take this forward. Let's start with the European Parliament. I was wondering, Mairead McGuinness, if you could point out to the actions that you think are important in what Michael just told us.
Okay, I'm in the hot seat. I'm kicking off this part of the panel, and thank you for the introduction. And thank you, Michael, for your statement. One of the things that struck me was about turning up the volume and no voice unheard, but actually the need for perhaps less volume and more listening. What the European Parliament has to do is to use better the resources of the Fundamental Rights Agency. I'm not sure that enough members tap into what you have as a resource. I'm very happy to announce that you're coming to the Parliament in December to take part in a conference, and I think we need more of that level of engagement. As a general point, the European Union has amazing agencies in all sorts of areas, but this is the most fundamental one because it's about human rights. So I think that's the first action we need, better engagement. Perhaps it is a topic for the next Parliament, because we will have a new Parliament elected in May of next year. So I think that's a challenge for those who want this issue to be higher up on the agenda. The second point I would make is that you talked about going local, and I think this is absolutely fundamental. And when you go local, you don't hear one voice, you hear many voices. And I think across the European Union, perhaps there are voices that are afraid to speak because they have a different perspective on this issue. And I think that you picked that up in your concluding remarks, that we have to listen to those who have a different view. Because I think the danger of not allowing that voice be heard is that it becomes suppressed but doesn't go away. Mm-hmm. So we have to find a way to go local and to allow all of the voices to be heard in a respectful way. Now that is a huge challenge. And it is something, I suppose, I'm a directly elected member of the European Parliament, so it's not a list system in my country, in Ireland. So we do go local all the time. But even I feel that I'm not hearing all of the different voices that are there. So I also have a duty to try and get the voices reflected. Is there, and this is a question, a sense amongst some citizens that in order to promote human rights, that they lose rights? This is a difficult issue to grasp, but nonetheless, I think it's something that we need to reflect upon. Right. If we live in a climate where people are more fearful, whether the fear is valid or not, then we have to understand what these fears come from and try and address those fears in a respectful way. So I would support this concept of go local.
And the final point then, please.
Pardon me?
Final point, Ms. McGuinness.
I suppose I could end with that, because I think those are two key points. Perhaps in summation, it is to make sure that all of you access the European Parliament. I'm amazed by how organisations say, how do we influence? And we're very open and accessible. And I would hope that you would understand that that is the case. I was glad to see other members of Parliament on the video there, and I'm here certainly to listen. And that's perhaps the key point for me, is that politicians perhaps need to listen more than we speak, if we are allowed to.
Well, you definitely have a floor here. Thank you very much indeed. Mr. Crabit, from your point of view, the Commission, what struck you the most about the Chair's statement?
Thank you first for this impressive forum, because it's the first time that I see such a diversity of actors, and I think this is very impressive. Three challenges that I can take from the speech of Michael. The first one is how to ensure that pluralism, tolerance. The first one is to ensure how pluralism, tolerance, and non-discrimination prevail in our society. It's in the treaty, but we can't see, and when we listen all the working group, that there are huge challenges. Racism, hate speech, discrimination, exclusion is everywhere. On the solution, there is not a quick fix, but we know that it's multidisciplinary solution. We know that it will be multitasking and multi-level. That's very clear. The second point is the effectiveness of the rights on the ground. We are well equipped in terms of legislation, norms, and standards. The Charter of Fundamental Rights is there. The key challenge for all of us is the effectiveness on the ground. And I think we need to see how to maximize the existing tools, and I think there was a lot of interesting ideas from that point of view. But a key player for having more effectiveness is the civil society, because you are at the forefront of the challenge of putting in practice fundamental rights. And the third challenge that I can see is how to better work all together. Mm-hmm. The forum is a good illustration of how it is possible to bring together very different players. I was very interested also by the local action, because it is a key element, as you have mentioned, also to be more effective. So this is my three instinctive reactions after having heard Michael.
Very good. We will come back to you with some follow-up questions, so never fear. You haven't had the last word yet. But let me turn to Mr. Ciamba now, please.
Thank you so much. And first of all, let me start by extending our appreciation for the forum. I think, when it's very timely for us, it's very topical in the sense that we are taking over the presidency. This is a presidency that I think is going to be shaped by various challenges, and some of the stories, are going to be elections for the European Parliament, and as well, one of the fundamental issues of Europe, like Brexit, how it's going to play and how it's going to get into the debate we mentioned. I think, Michael had, added up to the chair statement. I think, it's now we have the choice either to comment on what was supposed to be the chair statement or Michael's speech. I should say that on what Michael was saying, I think everybody agreed on, some of the points here, going more local. I think the importance of the forum as a platform, because I think this is where we have the interconnections, and the idea is how we are going to connect the dots, because, how we are going to create a vehicle. And I think, in a way, this is the mission of the agency itself. And I think by doing this kind of forum, this is a step in the right direction. For us as a presidency, it's going to be a big challenge, not only going local, but sometimes going global. Because in a way, even if we don't have such a great role as usual as a presidency in the external relations, we have to recognize that some of these issues are related by interaction in the UN and as well with the third parties, because actually this is not a debate that used to be a debate out of Europe. Now, of course, it's a debate in Europe, but we should not forget that should be kept as well in the other conversations we have over the Atlantic, with the other countries. We think that values and fundamental rights and freedoms are the foundation of the democratic system and of the European project. I think I should make some mentions on what in the chair statement was put on the strengthening of belonging through education and employment. Education is the basis for a good cohesion of our societies, and in a diverse society, inclusion of all children and youth on equal conditions is essential. I think Romania is going to choose as one of the key themes cohesion, and I think cohesion is something that should be raised more as well in terms of the fundamental rights, because at the end of the day, discrimination could play exactly in the opposite direction of a disruption and not allowing cohesion to play the role it should. For us, inclusive education is highly relevant for inclusive societies and for the integration of persons belonging to national minorities. Of course, this is not the field here, but as a parenthesis, Romanian system of protection of national minorities has been recognized as one of the best, in the sense that the key element of it is to promote tolerance and intercultural dialogue in order to strengthen the social cohesion. In the same time, I think the chair statement was putting quite interesting, future-oriented questions, like how we are going to deal with AI and how we are going to deal actually with disinformation and fake news. This is one of the issues that should be related with fundamental values, because, you know, we have the asymmetry of values, how you fight something that doesn't have the same type of system. And this is something we are, for example, facing in our part of Europe when it comes to fake news, disinformation, then, you know, cyber attacks that are targeting our systems, and, you know, in a way, how we respond to it. And if we are going to give, you know, is the question, we should not give up the values and should not give up the rules, but in the same time, I think we should be efficient and try not to allow it, because otherwise this is going to become the main narrative.
Right. Minister, I'm going to come back to you with some of the priorities of the Romanian presidency, but let me do that later. Let me turn now to, thank you very much, let me turn now to Zara. We've heard from the institutions, as it were, Zara, and I was wondering from your point of view, what was there in Michael's statement that struck you as being, you know, the most important for all of us here to take the actions forward for tomorrow's Europe?
I think the most important thing that's come out of the statement is our need to be proactive. We can't just sit and wait for people to come to us to decide that there is an issue that needs to be raised. Civil society organisations, governments, European level institutions and the European Parliament need to be working together to actively go out and engage with communities. For me, the thing that struck me over the course of the forum is kind of three ideas that just keep coming back to me. One is connection, one is communication, and the third and probably most important is courage. We need to have the courage to stand for our beliefs, to share with people who don't necessarily think that they belong in the space or belong in the room or belong in the conversation, to be here, to have those conversations. We need to have the courage to acknowledge that not all expertise exists on stages, and actually the expertise can be in the room. We need to have the courage to make sure that we can say when things aren't working, but also when things are working. We need to have a positive approach where we're presenting not only problems, but solutions. And I think the key thing that came from me from Michael's speech was, yes, we need to be working at a local level. The reason we need to be working at a local level is that the solutions are already in action in some part of Europe. We need to be facilitating those solutions to be shared across Europe, so that rather than saying that the expertise is from above, the expertise is shared by all of us in this room and those of us outside of this room. I think it's very important that we show how rights relate to everyone, and that they're not something that is just for one group or a group when there is a crisis, but they're something that we live with on a daily basis. It is a sad reality at the moment that the vast majority of citizens in Europe only realise they have rights when they're threatened. We need to help people realise that they have rights in good times and in bad.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. Zara, thank you very much indeed. You really captured the essence of what this 3 days has been about: connection, courage, communication. Thank you very much indeed. So I promised a second round of questions. I'm going to ask you a second round of questions. So for you, Ms. McGuinness, you are involved in discussions about faith, churches, and this is something that we've discussed here as well, you know, over the last 2 days and a half. How can faith-based communities be brought in more effectively, more efficiently, more perhaps visibly as well into the discussion on fundamental rights in Europe?
Okay. Can I start by prefacing the remark that not all expertise exists on stages? Thank you for that, because that is true. I think it always reminds me, and I said it in the working group earlier, that I came to listen as much as to participate. Specifically on the question of my role in the European Parliament is under Article 17, where we have a dialogue with the religious communities and the non-confessional organisations. You've asked me how they can be brought in. I hope they're in. I think that the idea that they're not in would be terrible because we have an obligation. But I do think you raise a more fundamental question, how it can be more effective. And some of the things I picked up when I listened this morning in the workshop I was involved in is that there is a sense amongst faith communities, and indeed rather those who may not have faith, that they're not included sufficiently in the work of the institutions. The only area that I can be responsible for is the European Parliament. As Vice President, I'm charged with making sure that there is this dialogue. And one of the things I'd like to reflect on, and I've put a challenge out as well, is how do we do it better? So how do faith communities want this engagement to happen? It may be, as I suggested, it should be through committee where policy is shaped. Is it always that it has to be under the label of a church, or can those who are stakeholders in NGOs with a faith basis also participate at that level? So I think we together will be shaping a strategy for the future, and I'll be preparing a report for the Parliament's Bureau because I think we can do things better. What I would be worried about is a sense in which in a secular societies that the faith communities may feel excluded, and if they feel excluded, then we have an issue. We have to address that. Perhaps you need also to speak more about what you do, because maybe there isn't an understanding of the role of faith-based communities in human rights, in fundamental rights, and the European Parliament should be a platform where that is allowed. So I think there are many ways in which we can do things better, but I can't be the one that comes up with the ideas because you have to participate and help me to shape these ideas. There's always this struggle between secularism and the religious. I think it's an unnecessary struggle, and I think that we need to get over ourselves a little here, because if this is about delivering on fundamental human rights, and for example, I would compliment Romania in terms of deinstitutionalization. Huge amount of work being done there by both non-faith and faith-based and the state itself. And perhaps it's not discussed because it's working. So the good news stories of what's happening need to be reflected.
Right. You talked about exclusion, and we talked about uncomfortable questions and conversations. There is a category of European citizen that does feel excluded, and that sometimes has to do with Islam. And we have talked about Islamophobia here, etc. So I wanted to ask you, as a member of the European Parliament, how are you engaging with the European Muslims?
Well, they're included in all our conversations, events that I would hold, because they're a faith-based community. I think there's a question for me, am I doing enough in my own country to engage? I have had engagements, but I feel I could do more and I could do it better. Because I think Michael was so true when you said, you know, sometimes the differences that exist melt away when you sit with people. If you have a faith, it is a faith which is usually based on good works and decency and humanity, and therefore that whatever your belief, where it comes from, the fundamentals cross religions. So I often, chide myself that I don't do enough. But please bear this in mind, that members of the European Parliament deal with many issues, and sometimes we deal with the immediate citizen issues, which don't allow us have this space to reflect on the bigger questions. But we have to make room for those bigger questions. So you challenge me rightly, and I certainly am aware that we could do more. But also I think for those faith communities who feel excluded, they need to speak up and out and talk not just to those like me who are charged in this role, but to their elected members, whether it's at local, national or European level. The worst thing we can do is say or allow a community to feel that they're excluded when they have huge opportunities to be included. So there's also a responsibility that I would put back on communities.
Right, absolutely right. And of course, with the European elections coming up next May, there is an opportunity to be really part of the discussion and to vote. Michael, you wanted to come in very quickly. I need to give you, or somebody can give you the microphone. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah, no, I was very interested in your question about Islamophobia and the situation of Muslims, and fully supporting everything Mairead said. I just wanted to add that this is a really good example of where the agency produces very rich data that frankly is underused. We just a few months ago last year published the most ambitious survey of the experience of being Muslim in Europe that's ever been attempted. And again, this actually tells a story. It's a sentiment survey. So this is the view of Muslims themselves about their experience. So I'd encourage people to track that down on our website. Also, next month, we're going to launch an online database of Islamophobia, of expressions of hatred and discrimination against Muslims, which again will be a real-time resource to be used, which is comparative across the 28 member states. And the last thing I'll say is sometimes data surprises. You would expect, and you would be right, if I told you that our evidence is that there's intolerable levels of discrimination against Muslims, that they typically don't complain, in part because they don't see the point of complaining. All of that, as expected, true, but nuggets of genuine surprise, which are hugely encouraging. For instance, we learned from our survey, the one I've just referred to, that Muslims in Europe invest a higher degree of trust in the institutions of our states than our general populations do. And this is such a fantastic basis for integration. And it's one, frankly, we squander, because our evidence also showed that the longer a migrant Muslim stays in Europe, the lower the level of trust.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Michael, for making that point. And actually, your FRA reports are very valuable for the think tank community, so thank you for pointing that out. We've used them a lot at Friends of Europe. Monsieur Crabit, so to take the European Commission point of view, we've heard from the Commissioner on the first day, actually, about all the different actions she's going to take. I was wondering, from your point of view, what are your key challenges and where are you going to put the focus in the coming weeks, months?
I think, again, ensuring the effectiveness on the ground of the fundamental rights and the Charter is really something where we need to find a way to maximize our enforcement toolbox. We have a number of tools and instruments, and we have to see what to do. What is important is to take the point of view of the end user of the rights, which are people, citizens. And if they are facing problems, they need to trust institutions. So it was very good to have this topic in this forum, because it's very important. And if you look at the chain of players which have to be effective for enforcing fundamental rights, is quite impressive. Of course, we need to have independent court system, and we know that we are facing certain challenges, and the Commission has not hesitated to launch infringement, to trigger Article 7 due to a rule of law serious situation in one member state. But it's not only the court system, it's also the national authorities. This is also the independent authorities like the equality body, the national human rights institutions, which have a key role also for ensuring the effectiveness of this fundamental right. And we want to support this by funding, by financial support, by networking. I think this month we will have the first meeting of the guardianship network, which has a very important role for, in particular, children in migration. And then, of course, the civil society. Civil society is a key actor for enforcing, for contributing to an effective enforcement of the rights. And as you know, the Commission is very concerned by the shrinking space of the civil society. And we have intervened because now it's not only an issue of funding, it's also an issue of new national rules which could affect the functioning of civil society. And the Commission has decided to launch value-related infringements, as we say in our jargon, in order to, when we consider that certain of these new legislation are contrary to EU law. And the financial support is more than ever crucial. You know that the Commission has proposed a new programs for the next generation of what we call the multi-financial framework. And there is a very important negotiation now in the Council and in the Parliament about this new generation of programs which will help to support the civil society. And that will be very important to ensure that what the Commission has proposed, which is to have sufficient funding for the civil society which promote, which uphold fundamental value, that the end result of the negotiation will be adequate. That will be so. This is a chain of players which has to be supported, and that's what we are trying to do.
Right. And on the multi-annual financial framework, negotiations are underway, and there's always a tendency, isn't there, that funding is cut for important initiatives like, civil society, human rights, etc. What are you doing to make sure that this doesn't happen this time?
Yeah, it's a serious concern.
What can we do?
It is a serious concern, and it is what, so under our current funding program, every year we are trying to support through open call and where civil society can propose their different projects. And of course, in the new generation of program, it will be even more important because indeed, there is this trend of cutting the fund. One point which is very important in all this discussion is, of course, to be more effective also when using EU funds.
Right.
So it's a task for the EU institution, it's a task for the civil society to try to maximize the project, to have projects which are in line with the key priorities, to work together, to find a better manner to use effectively the funds, because everywhere it's always a challenge.
That's right, and that's where Michael's point about making alliances and coalitions and working together, I guess, becomes much more important as well. Mr. Ciamba, so the priorities for the Romanian presidency, as you started off telling us in 2019, and you made some interesting points about global action as well, so I was wondering if you could give us a little bit more detail of your plans.
No, actually, and thank you so much as well mentioning the multi-financial framework. This is another challenge we're going to face during our presidency, how we make people happy, and how you're going to deal with, go over the zero-sum game and, make it a win-win game. And actually I think one of the basic priority for us, and, in the same time, the motto and what is the edges of our presidency is going to be emphasizing economic, social, and territorial cohesion. Because we think that at the end of the day, cohesion is the basis for further developing the European project. And we should have to say the areas of fundamental rights is linked with the way we can move forward, as well it has its own thing about cohesion. In the same time, I think we want to regain the status of a successful presidency. The status of successful presidency is to be a honest broker. And actually, the way presidencies used to be were to be more on the honest broker side than, on pushing their own agenda. And I think this is where I think Romania would stand, and this is where the extensive cooperation with the FRA, it's an important element. Because, we have to, a honest broker gets to the honest institutions of the Union. And this is where we should move further. When it comes to the challenges, we have to say that, of course, we have to stay united. And, normally election time is the worst time you could have. So, and these are topical, critical elections for Europe. We have to recognize that. So, in the same time, so we have to be sure there no increase of hate speech, and we have to be sure that during our presidency, even in the conditions of an election campaign for the European Parliament, there is going to be no encouragement of separation and discrimination, the most vulnerable persons in our societies. And I think diversity should be our pride. In the same time, we have to recognize that we need to ensure a proper balance between security and fundamental rights and freedoms, including the free movement of persons, which is a fundamental pillar of the Union. And this is where it comes in the fact that we'll have to deal with the most traumatic event in the history of the Union, who is the Brexit, and during our presidency, because this is where we have to reconnect with the initial mission of the Union, and which actually the end is protecting the fundamental freedoms of the Union, because we speak about fundamental rights, but we should not forget the Union itself has these fundamental freedoms that are the basis. Whatever we are doing, this is what makes the Union so different in comparison with any other country, any other space They are the 4 fundamental freedoms, and we should be sure that they are not touched upon. And this is not an easy one, because of course in the campaign there is going to be an impulse to use some of the things and to say, to make a pick and choose. You know, we speak about cherry picking so much these days, but we should say that as well, member states should not be cherry picking what they want and what they don't. And this is where cohesion plays back, and discrimination. And if you preserve and fulfill the benchmarks and the criteria, you should be allowed to do what you ask for, you know. So this is the spirit of Europe.
So, State Secretary, you talked about fundamental rights and you talked about security, and I just want to push you a little bit on, that is a debate that's being held across Europe all the time, security versus fundamental rights. And I was wondering, from the Romanian point of view, since you brought it up, what will be the emphasis you will lay in this issue? How are you going to balance the two? It's a big debate within Europe.
This is what I said, you know, before, in a way. We are going to be a honest broker. For us, you know, I should say, fortunately, or unfortunately, they are different. Migration is not been a factor. I think we proved solidarity during the migration crisis, and nobody speaks anymore about it. You know, so in that part, you know, Romania was a bright spot in the sense of providing solidarity, and with, of course, political costs. But at the end of the day, what was important, we didn't have the same type of debate. So what we are saying, we want to be a honest broker, not one side or the other. We recognize that in order not to lose something, maybe we have to find a compromise. But in the same time, we don't think that going from one extreme to the other is the solution. And I think this is where it's our role, because institutionally, if a member state wants more security, if another member state wants to be more on the fundamental rights and freedom, in a way, we have to be the honest broker, and we have to act for both of them and trying to tune our action forward in that direction.
Try and find common ground. Michael, do you want to come in? Please, could you pass the...
Thank you very much. The State Secretary, I think, actually put it exactly right when he said it's not about zero-sum game, it's about win-win. And I think in terms of the balance of fundamental and human rights and security, that's exactly right. We cannot frame it as an either-or. It's not more rights means less security, more security means less rights. In the first place, security is essential. Anybody who cares about human rights has to stand up for safe societies. I learned that the hard way by running a Human Rights Commission in Northern Ireland. I could not do my job in that society if I didn't accept that effective counter-terrorism is vital for a society. But it doesn't have to be at the expense of human rights. And in fact, I think we have so much evidence now, including from the agency, to show that a security arrangement is stronger and better at its security job if it respects human and fundamental rights. We see this in the discussions right now in the European Union regarding the large-scale data systems at the frontiers. That's, in large part, a security framework. And by respecting human rights in how these systems speak to each other and things of that nature, we'll actually end up with a more secure Europe. So please, let's avoid having an either-or framing for this very important discussion.
Thank you very much indeed. Yes, please, Mairead, do you want to come in on this?
I just want to pick up the State Secretary's comments, and obviously to wish you well in the presidency. It's at the toughest of possible times, so you'll need all our good wishes. And you mentioned Brexit, which is going to be a big challenge. And if you look at some of the conversations around Brexit, citizens are concerned. UK citizens in the European Union are concerned about their rights, and EU citizens that live in the United Kingdom are concerned about their rights. So this is quite a fundamental issue in the debate on Brexit. And Michael referenced Northern Ireland. I represent a constituency on the border with Northern Ireland. So there's a lot of uncertainty and fear and anxiety amongst the communities there that Brexit won't impact negatively a peace process which is in existence for 20 years and is fragile. Absolutely. And my last remark again goes back to this idea of what Europe brings to the table in terms of fundamental rights, which is that we actually have a place where we can talk to each other about these and where we put each other under pressure. And I suppose because the United Kingdom is leaving the European Union, I would hope that our influence will not wane, and indeed that the United Kingdom's influence will not wane in this area, because my own experience of EU membership and it's a long time ago since Ireland joined, we became a more open society because we were mixing and mingling and listening and sharing our experience, and we're the better for that. And even though it's difficult, I would share Michael's optimism that in the most difficult of times, we have to be the very strongest we can be. And that is true for those who are in the NGO community and those of us who are in politics, that we have to defend the basis of democracy, but also listen to those who take a different view so that they don't go to the extremes.
Absolutely. Thank you very much indeed, Zara, your insights.
Not a single person in Europe is one identity. We all have multiple identities. We are intersectional human beings. Therefore, conversations about most things should involve most people, because people don't fit into tight boxes. I was struck earlier in the forum by a previous speaker, Isidore Charmen, who said that communities were contact zones. For me, if communities are contact zones, then civil society organisations are the facilitators of inclusive and stress-free contact. They're spaces in which you can meet others who share your identity, but those who also don't share your identity. I think we're at a crossroads in Europe at the moment, and we have a choice. We can choose to be derisive and divisive, or we can choose to come together. One of the things that has happened over the course of this forum is lots of people from lots of different spaces in Europe have come together and they have talked about the challenges that they are facing. Yes, there are a lot of challenges, and they are multiple and they are complicated. But the thing that struck me is that there is commonality in our challenges. And actually, if we can find ways to come together, to have conversations, we can find solutions that work across different experiences, across different commonalities, so that we can learn from each other and continue to promote the best of human beings. I think that there is a really strong need to ensure that when we're having discussions at all levels of decision making, that there is representation in the room. And what do I mean by that? I mean that we are not just the powerful talking to the powerful, but actually the powerless talking to the powerful, people talking to one another. Because actually, lots of people don't realise that they have power. And actually every voice, every person, every communication has power. And we need to support people to harness their own power, to use civil society organisations to amplify their voice, and then for civil society organisations to work together across issues to amplify the voice of the people even more. I think the thing that struck me from a lot of the conversations that have happened on the stage is there are lots of different issues that are current and important. But actually, the key thing that's here, and I guess it's what the whole of this forum is about, is how do we create a Europe where anyone that wants to be here can belong in Europe. And I think for that, it comes back to civil society organisations. So how will structures work with civil society organisations to make sure communities are there? But also how will civil society organisations make sure that they connect with individuals, particularly those that don't see a place for themselves? There should be a place for everyone in Europe, not just those of us who insert ourselves in a place. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Zara, for capturing the essence of what this has been all about. And you really spared me the effort of making a wrap-up statement, because I think you've really said it all. The only thing I'll add to what you've said is that We should all remember when we're here in Europe that we also stand on the global stage. And we saw that yesterday at the United Nations General Assembly. Europe matters on the world stage. And to make Europe matter even more, we have to be actually sure that we respect and promote and encourage and defend our fundamental rights, because that's what Europe is all about. It's about values on the world stage. Because, as we said yesterday, Michael, populism is contagious, and what Europe does matters to the rest of the world. So what happens in Europe doesn't just stay in Europe. So please join me in thanking our panel, thanking all 5 of you for being here.